All right, it's 10 o'clock. Can you hit the record button?
Is it on the top right? You see it?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
All right. Well, welcome all. This is Dan Radomski, Executive Director of the Centropolis Accelerator at Lawrence Tech University. I'm very grateful that you could all join us today on a very important topic, which is trying to navigate this amazing $1 trillion infrastructure funding initiative. It's our hope that myself and the speakers here that have made themselves available today at the state level can kind of share a little bit about what we know about this funding and how it can potentially impact Michigan businesses and Michigan communities in a very positive way and support our economy and manufacturing base. So we had 177 people registered. For those that maybe registered and did not attend, and of course, for those that are attending, we are recording this webinar and we'll make the recording available at the close of the event so you can access it later. We are going to have all of our speakers speak back to back and then have a Q&A session at the very end. So anytime you have a question, whether it's for the entire group or for an individual speaker, I request that you use the Q&A function and list your question in that function, and we'll make sure to monitor it and try to get all your questions answered. So feel free to use that at any time. So this is the agenda. First, I'll do a quick overview of Centropolis and kind of the clean tech funding landscape and at a high level. And then we'll be putting a little more attention on dissecting the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act. We also will have speakers of the state talking about the impact that they're trying to have through the economic development organizations and energy offices. So I want to thank my speakers for being here today. Josh Brugman, who's an expert in residence at Centropolis Accelerator, and also runs his own company, Fresh Coast. And then Robert Jackson, who is the director of the Energy Office, Energy Ombudsman of the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Eagle. And Nadia Abanusser, who's in charge of federal programs and directives for the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. Thanks for being here today. I also want to make sure before we get started, I thank our supporters and funders. We originally launched as a smart zone incubator for the state of Michigan by the city of Southfield, Lawrence Tech University, and MEDC. And we've since received a great deal of funding through federal agencies, foundations, and others. And especially Eagle, who's made a big commitment into our focus in clean tech. A lot of what's in this BIL and IRA and CHIPS Act and other funding that's coming from the federal government is clean energy, clean tech related circular economy investments. And we'll try to do our best to explain what those look like and even timing and maybe even how the money, as we understand it, will flow eventually to communities and businesses. So a little bit first about Centropolis. Our mantra is all about getting products designed, engineered, and manufactured in Michigan. And we've been in operation for 5 years, have helped launch several products. We have in-house engineering and design, and we're very grateful to be in this position to support clean tech products as well being developed and manufactured here in our home state. What's a little bit unique about our program is we not only support startups like a lot of incubators do, but we also support established small businesses. And the reason we did this is some of the best ideas that we see, especially in hard tech, are with established small businesses, especially small manufacturers that are always coming up with ideas for new materials, products, and manufacturing processes. Some time ago, we launched the C3 Accelerator as funded by Eagle. And that now has about $5 million in funding to support investments, grants, and services to what we call clean tech, climate tech, and circular economy hardware technologies. The investments we're able to make are up to $50,000 per company. These are really unique equity-free zero interest loan, essentially, that the company must pay back after 24 months. Also includes a small success fee that's capped out over a period of time on the revenues that we are able to help our clients generate. So we use the investment to help companies develop products, engineer, prototype, get to market, And then after we help them get successful in generating revenue and being a viable business, they pay us back, and then we use it as an evergreen fund to help the next Michigan-based business. We use a really unique curriculum that I helped develop for the Department of Energy called Build for Scale. It's basically product development 101, manufacturing 101. It's free and online, but we often have workshops on design for manufacturability and how to develop products that our clients can take advantage of. And what makes us unique and how we help you, if you do have whether it's a Cleantech or just any old, hardware product, consumer product, medical device, we, really support you by understanding how to design this product for durability, reliability, customer use, market acceptance. And we put a lot of attention into design for manufacturability, how to reduce the bill of materials, components, manufacturing costs, even in the design process, understand how we can lower costs of assembling and packaging the product and ensuring that it's going to be designed well for maintenance and sustainability as well. And the way we get it done is through our staff and our really talented experts and residents. We now have over 30 EIRs that are experts in all types of materials and tooling and prototyping and manufacturing processes, as well as business and market sectors to help on the business strategy side. So really grateful to have this talented group supporting our clients on a regular basis. We have in-house engineering, meaning we can do our own CAD work, finite element analysis to help design products in a simulated environment. We have a prototyping shop where we can also not only just develop a product with 3D printers and machine shop, but also do hardware in the loop for more complicated systems, and also reverse engineer physical prototypes. We're also lucky to have in the same location here on the campus of Lawrence Tech in Southfield, Michigan, not only the prototyping lab, but co-working space for those that need office space and a place to operate out of. And over the 5 years that we've been in operation, we've had tremendous impact, helping commercialize 38 new products that are manufactured right here in Michigan. And one of the metrics that I'm very proud to communicate is when we ask our clients to be, surveyed every 6 months, we ask how many contracts they have sent to Michigan suppliers, many of which were from introductions we made. And as you can see there, over 5 years, our clients have sent 366 contracts for $24 million worth of investment to the local supply chain. So the economic multiplier of our work, developing hardware, hard tech, is very beneficial to our economy. So let's jump into the Cleantech, or we call the C3, funding landscape. And I'm going to touch on kind of the high level of, all the funding that's kind of out there, and ask Josh, Nadia, and Robert to specifically spend a little more time on the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. So when we work with companies and try to help them really understand what's available to them, especially in the Cleantech space, we first, especially if they're developing new technology, make sure that they have a good understanding of what stage of development they're at, right? So technology readiness levels are important to get your hands around as to, are you at the idea stage? Are you at, first prototype, maybe beta prototypes that are going in the hands of customers or in the field? And based on your TRL levels, it often has a direct correlation to the availability of the type of funding that would support that stage, right? So very early TRL levels, it's, SBIR funding at the federal level, maybe ARPA-E for breakthrough technologies, right? And then as you advance a little bit in your TRLs, accelerator programs like C3 and Next Cycle and Techstars and other programs are generally come in and help support funding as well as business milestones. And, seed funding and angel funding and other things, you generally come in a little bit later, as well as venture capital when you already have a minimal viable product and you have some revenue generated. I think what's interesting when you look at the BIL, the CHIPS Act, IRA, it's more for more mature technologies that are ready to be deployed. There is some R&D dollars in there, so you could, definitely see some of the funding supporting at your earlier TRL level. But as you'll find as we go through this discussion, A lot of the funding is for more mature technology and products that are ready for market and maybe not widely deployed. So at the federal level, we're going to hear a little bit about some of the new announcements, but there's always been funding available for clean tech, right? And through multiple agencies, not just the Department of Energy. And the DOE, quite a bit of funding is made available through the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Department, as well as RPE, as I mentioned. But there's quite often sustainability, clean tech, circular economy, investment support for R&D and deployments and demonstration opportunities through the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, as well as the Department of Defense, NSF, Department of Transportation, especially for things like electric vehicles. So in this deck is, quite a bit of detail, including what those, budgets look like for ARPA-E and EERE with the Department of Energy. I think it's, most important to recognize if you're going to approach federal funding and a federal grant, for instance, that you understand how these offices work and how they're kind of compartmentalized and what the missions are behind these different energy offices. So obviously there's an office for solar, geothermal, wind, advanced manufacturing on efficiencies in manufacturing operations. And then there's the vehicle technologies office that's more looking for technologies that are going to make vehicles more energy efficient and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And, what's great about our federal government is a lot, is available and publicly online, including their budgets. The 2022 budgets have been approved. They're submitting 2023 budgets. So some of the funding that you've heard from BIL and IRA that Josh, Nadia, and Robert will get into later is in addition to this already dedicated funding for research and development and deployment projects through these energy offices. And quite often, if you're not familiar with these energy offices, online also are roadmaps, right? They often publish R&D roadmaps and ultimately what innovation areas they're trying to focus on, which has a direct correlation to the federal government's mission to improve our energy efficiency and emission reductions profiles. And what I always suggest is that you consider going to their annual merit reviews. So each office of the Department of Energy has an annual merit review where you can meet with their staff and other companies, national labs, and universities that are doing a lot of research in this area, where you can collaborate, connect, and partner. The other thing to think about too is that sometimes the funding from the federal government does not always go directly to the company or for that matter, even to state, city, county coffers, right? In many cases, it's, goes into an existing organization, an NGO, a nonprofit, a public-private partnership. The manufacturing institutes that were lifted up over the last few years, there's now 14 total, including 2 that are right here in our home state, LIFT and IACME. They're already focusing a lot of research dollars and efforts and collaborations on things like next generation metal alloys or advanced composites, in the case of remade on recycling materials. So if you're not already engaged in this could be a great opportunity to support your research initiatives and allow you to partner with universities, national labs, and companies big and large that are also have similar missions. There's also what's known as American-made prize challenges, sometimes smaller funding, in some cases more significant funding, that also give you an indication what the federal government is interested in, whether it's next generation, systems for solar or e-drive motors. These are just 10 of the prize challenges that are open and available for applications today. So the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the $1 trillion that we were talking about, is really it was originally packaged along with our money a couple of years ago, and it has been approved and released a little bit over time. But think about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law as funding, obviously, infrastructure, but very specifically infrastructure of all types, right? Broadband, infrastructure across the country and improvement of water infrastructure, to avoid, contamination of lead pipes, for instance. But as you see here, quite a bit of this funding is dedicated to sustainability initiatives, right? With $73 billion going to modernize our power grid and $39 billion going to modernize our public transit, particularly electrifying rail and buses. There's $7.5 billion going into a nation network of EV charging. And what might be a little bit less obvious here is the funding that you see that's going into airports and water ports. Much of that money is earmarked for sustainability initiatives at those facilities. And that could include energy efficiency to the buildings in those operations, electrifying vehicles in those operations as well. Then there was a CHIPS Act. I know Nadia's going to talk a little bit about this very specifically to help support getting a better domestic production capacity, workforce development in our country. With the recent chip shortage, this was a major initiative and has since attracted rather significant private funding as well to launch new semiconductor chip production plants throughout the nation. And then the Inflation Reduction Act, which Josh will get into in a little more detail, along with Nadia and Robert, was announced in August and approved for $369 billion of investment in climate and clean energy in all areas, as you see here. And think about this, if we think about BIL as being more on infrastructure and construction, and the Inflation Reduction Act is really supporting use and deployment. And this is a little bit of an eye chart, but it gives you an idea of kind of the difference between the IRA and the BIL. And what I particularly like about the Inflation Reduction Act is it helps really incentivize the deployment of things like large wind parks and solar parks. And for the first time ever, it even provides investment tax credits and production tax credits for those that are developing energy storage related projects. It has a dedication for the first time ever, the ITC and the PTC to be more than 1 year in advance, right? So it provides a 10-year horizon, which gives a lot of surety to the market and those that are developing projects, renewable energy projects, that those tax credits will be there long term as they're in operation. It also provides funding to residential energy efficiency in a rather significant way that Josh will talk about. And, we haven't seen that commitment in a long time to kind of decarbonize all forms of buildings, right? Residential, commercial buildings, industrial buildings. So this is really an unprecedented amount of funding that all of which is going to be deployed over a number of years here in the future. We'll spend some time talking about how is that money going to be deployed and how does the money flow, right? Because there's companies that are on the line today, communities, economic development groups, understanding, projects that you would like to see through and likely how you're going to have to approach and position yourself for that is going to be really important. So for those that went through the American, Rescue Plan Act, there was a natural progression of funding from, once approved by Congress to U.S. Treasury and then the state and local governments, and they, put out eligible programs, right? In the case of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, for instance, it's going to be a lot of the same, but in some cases that the funding is going to go into existing programs, existing federal agencies, and maybe even strengthen their budgets. And then some will actually be directed directly down to, state energy offices, other state programs like Department of Transportation, and then some money will even find its way to cities and counties as well. So I hope this is helpful for you as we go on and explain in more detail the funding opportunities that are available through the BIL, CHIPS Act, and IRA. And this is my contact information if you want to get a hold of me later. But next up, I would like to introduce Josh Brueggemann to get into a little more detail into the BIL and IRA.
All right. Thanks, Dan. And thanks, Dan, for all of your awesome work across the state of Michigan to help us propel our clean tech economy forward. It's pretty incredible work that Centropolis is doing. So I'm Josh Brueggemann. I'm an expert in residence at Centropolis. I'm also a co-founder and managing partner at Fresh Coast Climate Solutions, and we're a consultancy focused on reversing climate change. And it's a pretty incredible time, quite frankly, to be working in this space right now. I'm hoping that over the next half an hour between Nadia, Robert, and myself, that we can continue to give you some more details on the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So I'm going to walk you through some general themes that we're seeing, and I'm going to break each of them down, and I think we'll continue on. So again, I just want to stress the fact that this is absolutely historic right now, that I am able to walk you through these themes and that we're able to walk you through in detail these different funding opportunities. All of these have aligned over the last few months, and it's fairly incredible to see how this funding is going to transform our economy. It's going to feel disruptive at times, but we know that over the next 10 years, it's critical from a climate perspective, and that we're going to see a lot of really transformative change. So some of the key themes that are emerging, again, these are from both the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. One, there's a real focus on building out the domestic supply chain. So you're going to see funding opportunities, for instance, that are focused on securing critical raw materials for, let's say, battery and EV manufacturing, but also on building out heat pumps. And so there's funding opportunities focused on that. Electrification, this is a term you're going to hear a lot, but there is funding focused on electrification of residential homes, of commercial buildings, helping to electrify industry. This includes not just EVs and solar panels, but battery storage and heat pumps and induction ranges and heat pump water heaters, things like that. So electrifying everything. Third, finally, we have some very much needed funding streams to tackle environmental justice and climate justice. There are new programs that have been created and that are going to come to fruition and help deploy solutions where they're needed. There are also incentives and bonuses for some of these funding streams to locate projects in distressed communities, which is so important. Fourth, batteries. There is a lot going on here with batteries, and it's everything from the R&D and development of batteries to encouraging the manufacturing and processing of them, deployment of batteries on the grids and buildings and homes, EVs, recycling and second uses of batteries. So there's a lot going on there. And the last major theme I want to mention is greenhouse gas emissions and carbon. Some of these incentives are going to shift to a focus on being technology agnostic. And so you're going to get incentivized. The more carbon or greenhouse gas emissions you reduce, the more incentive you get. And so we'll move to an area in the future here where it doesn't matter what technology is, it just matters how you get to the end goal. So digging in a little bit on the Inflation Reduction Act. So this is big picture of the entire Inflation Reduction Act on all the funding. And so I think it's really important to look at how the funding is hitting the different sectors. All right. So whether it's generation and transmission, that's where a lot of the funding is hitting, 178 billion of it. But there's also funding that's going to hit specifically the building sector, manufacturing, and transportation. We'll get into the specifics on how some of that funding is playing out, but some key themes here. One, there's a lot of focus on modernizing the grid, but we're going to see money flow into a lot of different entities. And I think that's important for everyone to understand, is that some of the money is going to come through the federal agencies. And so there may be, let's say, Department of Energy programs that you can tap into. Some of it's going to flow through state governments, some to local governments. Some of it's going to be able to, individuals like ourselves, we're going to be able to tap into it, or our businesses. And so there's kind of something for everyone here. That's something I want to stress. And then the other point here is that there's a 10-year horizon on a lot of this funding. So that gives business in the private sector and the public sector a really good runway to plan and be able to operate based off that time horizon. This isn't a year-to-year thing. There's a 10-year time horizon. That same Inflation Reduction Act funding, I went through and I took all the different funding streams in the Inflation Reduction Act that were focused on the environment. So this excludes all the medical Medicare stuff that was also part of the act. But I broke it into, there's a certain amount of funding that I categorized as grid modernization. So this could be renewable energy installation incentives at the grid scale. And then there's a certain amount of funding that goes into generating supply of clean energy widgets. So this would be the manufacturing of batteries, the manufacturing of electric vehicles, the Defense Production Act, which has been triggered to produce heat pumps. So there's a variety of things going on that essentially it's gonna help us make all the widgets that we need to then deploy. And then the third column you see there is demand. And the demand are the incentives that are going to allow us to be able to get those widgets that are produced through the supply to get them out into the market and actually use them and then realize the benefits. So that would be the tax credits for EVs. That would be, there's a extensive incentive package for low and moderate income homes of $14,000 to deploy electrification technology. That would be things like an increased tax deduction for commercial buildings. But I think it's important to see that we're spending a lot of money on modernizing the grid. Get asked that question all the time on, hey, can the grid handle all this? Well, we're deploying a lot of funding to make sure that can happen. I think properly incentivizing how we're going to produce all this stuff, and then likewise for how we're going to get it out there in the market. So switching gears a little bit into the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, as Dan mentioned, this covers everything infrastructure related, all the way from broadband and airports to roads and bridges. What you're looking at right now is a chart that Brookings Institution prepared, focused just on the top line funding. So some parts of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law are regular funding that occur on a regular cadence. It could be every year, every 5 years. This is looking just at the funding that's incremental, new programs that are coming online because of that. And so although a lot of it is still transportation related, and as Dan mentioned, even some of that transportation stuff still has clean tech and sustainability components behind it, there's a lot of funding behind resiliency and improving our power grid and doing climate and sustainability efforts. So we're going to see about $140 billion invested in both energy, watersheds, and the environment. And I'm going to go into that a little bit more. 29 billion on grid modernization, and then 8.6 billion focused on clean energy supply chains and manufacturing. So I tried to focus things here on line items that the Centropolis ecosystem is going to be most interested in. So looking a little more specifically at some of the key funding programs within the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law in the energy, water, and environment categories. And again, these are just 3 categories in this massive $1 trillion law. So we're looking at roughly 150 billion or about 15% of the total law here. So from an environmental standpoint, both of these laws, actually, what's really nice is there's a lot of focus on environmental justice and also with our tribal communities. So there's funding focused on resilience there. But this is where a lot of the funding comes in for the more circular economy items, material recovery, recycling, reduction, material reduction, post-consumer recycling programs, things like that. The water specific portion is really, there's a drinking water bucket of money, there's a clean water bucket of money, but this covers the full gamut of the entire water system, everything from water plants to wastewater to stormwater, lead water pipes, water resiliency and sustainability. So if you're operating in the water space, I would encourage you to dig in more here. Now, from an energy perspective, this, in addition to the Inflation Reduction Act, this is where a lot of additional funding comes in for grid infrastructure and reliability. A lot of focus on cybersecurity for the grid. There's a whole focus of money on renewable energy, and that's not just solar and wind, but it's also hydrogen and nuclear, hydropower, things like that. Lot of focus too on carbon capture technologies and how those get deployed on the grid. I want to stress again, clean energy supply chains. Both funding programs have money focused on building those supply chains out with the critical materials, helping manufacturers convert their manufacturing facilities over to help us produce the clean energy widgets and any related components with that. So if you're involved in any type of widget that falls into some of these categories, I would say let's talk more, because hopefully you can partner with someone and go after this. And then there's also a lot of focus on the very much needed weatherization, low income energy assistance, helping get the workforce trained and getting better, more efficient building codes out there. So these are just really top line details here. Now, when we look at both funding streams, and I think about the stakeholders in the Centropolis community, here's some very specific funding streams from both the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. These are not by any means all inclusive. It's just a highlight list here. But a couple things I'll highlight for you. One is the for commercial buildings, the Section 179D tax deduction, that more than doubled and almost tripled. It went from $1.80 per square foot up to a minimum of $2.50, all the way up to $5 per square foot. So that's pretty big for the folks that operate in that ecosystem. There's a variety of renewable energy, either tax credits or production tax credits or an investment tax credits. There's also incentives to locate those investments in distressed communities that are pretty significant, quite frankly. Advanced manufacturing production tax credit. So there's a lot going on here, but to produce, to re-equip, if you're involved in any type of clean energy widget, the recycling of those, the second uses of those, I would say read that more, but there's a variety of funding opportunities that are focused on that, on how do we incentivize you to help produce this or to make your operations more efficient. On the EV side, there's definitely grants and loans to help manufacture EVs, but then on the use side, commercial EV tax credits. So if you have operations and you have vehicles, there are tax credits for you that are separate from the consumer tax credits of $7,500, and also zero emission trucks and buses. So things like dump trucks, recycling trucks, things like that. A few new things that have been made: the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. So this touches heavily on environmental justice. This is one where, more information still to come from the EPA on this, but this will provide I think it's 27 or $29 billion focused on deploying solutions in communities that need them. A whole lot going on the battery front. Again, everything from R&D to manufacturing to recycling and second uses. And the last thing I want to say down at the bottom there, We see this a lot in the circular economy, but there's specific funding on how to take byproducts from the agricultural community and incorporate them into products. And so I know for those of you that are involved in the circular economy, some of you have solutions, but there's specific line items for that. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Nadia. Here's my contact information. Really appreciate being able to present to all of you today, and I think this next decade is going to be significant. So excited.
Thanks, Josh. So Josh, I really appreciate Josh is just an incredible asset for Centropolis and for our client, for City of Michigan. I appreciate you providing that level of detail. Josh has even put even greater granularity into an Excel spreadsheet. And basically we've read every piece of legislation. So if we can be of help to any individual company or the economic development group or community that's looking for some advice, and including who to partner with, as Josh had mentioned, I highly recommend you connect with us offline from this webinar, and we'll do our best to inform you and connect you where it'll be beneficial. So Nadia is going to be next up. Abanasser with I'm sorry. It was Robert Jackson's up next. We got this out of order. So Robert, I'm going to ask you to pull up and before, as you're doing this and pulling up your presentation, Robert, make one more comment that one thing that really excited me about this funding and the commitment that's being made into the federal level is a commitment to domestic manufacturing. If anyone knows me, you know my my passion for this. I mean, that's why our whole mantra is about getting things made in Michigan. And a couple of nuances there that I wanted to point out. The 48C tax credits are obvious for anyone that's wanted to develop clean energy products, parts, anything domestically, whether it's for launching a new production facility or expanding an existing. So getting to know tax attorneys that know how to go after that and how to apply for those when they're made available through the federal treasury is going to be really important. And it's a service that we're going to try to help provide for Michigan entities. But the other thing that I'm really excited about is the production tax credit, investment tax credit that we talked about that supports solar, wind, energy storage related projects. For the first time ever, they had the percentage of credit that you receive, a higher percentage going to projects that have more domestic made product. I think that's really critical, right? Because you need that kind of encouragement for those that are developing the project. Why would you select domestic sources over foreign sources, right? So it gives us an opportunity to really develop domestically our supply chains for things like wind and solar and batteries, batteries all the way from raw material to finished cells and modules. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in our Q&A, but I'll ask Robert to talk a little bit about Eagle's commitments and what they see is about the funding opportunities that are going to make their way through Eagle to support Michigan's economy. Robert?
Great. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Josh. Again, Robert Jackson, Michigan Energy Office. And within Eagle, I oversee the state energy program as well as the state sustainability and recycling programs, which include next cycle. And so what I'm going to go over today is to talk about those energy related formula funding that is coming directly to Michigan that's within the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as the BIL, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Legislation, and the Inflation Reduction Act. So there's a lot here that you see on the screen. But, these are monies that are directly going to the Energy Office, or the Energy Office would be partnering with another state agency to bring that funding into the state. And then the funding that you see on the column, the first column where it talks about the estimate for Michigan, which is an asterisk, but everything else, if it's not an asterisk, it's real money that's coming in. And we have a very good idea that this is the amount that will come into the state and that will be made available through these programs for partnerships with the public and private sector. But before I get into the funding that's available through the BIL or the IRA or the ARP, I want to talk about what funding is available right now through the State Energy Office and through our State Energy Program regular funding. We do have funding available, and we have posted our Ps out there for retooling. Those funds are available to you right now. And we have funding for matching grants if you want to get access to a national lab or access to technical assistance through a third party, an accredited third party that would help you design and develop your product and get it to market. And we also have funding available for helping us understand what is the energy efficiency and renewable energy opportunities in commercial commercial buildings. And then we're working with consumers, DOE, and with DTE on a cold climate heat pump partnership. And those programs are actually working now, and if you're involved in those areas, then please let us know, and then we can plug you in or look for the opportunity that are going to be posted, that are currently posted on our website. But in terms of what we're expecting in the BIL, there's for the state energy program, and I should clarify, there's two parts of the state energy program funding. There's one formula, which I just talked about. That's an annual appropriation that the state gets from the DOE, and we offer those funding for both public and private sector projects, and the private sector ones, of which I talked about. And then there's the special one that we're seeing right now through the Bipartisan Infrastructure legislation. And that funding may be used for different purposes, but we know that the state is getting in, its appropriation is $11 million. We're filing that application in December, and we hope to have that funding available for programs sometime in March or April at the latest. The next program that I want to talk about is our Energy Efficiency Renewable Revolving Loan Program. This is an extension to our existing loan program that we offer through the State Energy Office. And we're expecting to receive notification from DOE sometime in the first quarter of 2023 that we will receive $3.1 million for energy efficiency loans at commercial buildings, which also includes, the industrial sector. And if you're interested in a low interest loan, then this will probably be an opportunity for you. I would think about this as kind of like a blending funding mechanism for work that you want to do. You can come in for a loan for retooling. You can come in for a grant for retooling too. So you can pretty much double your money on this one. The third thing that's out there that we're expecting sometime in the second or third quarter of next year is funding for the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program. I don't know if many of you know this or were a part of the Recovery Act, but the state received money as well as local communities to do energy efficiency work at the local level. For the state's portion, it will be $4 million, but there will be communities that will receive a direct allocation from the DOE to do energy efficiency and renewable energy work on commercial buildings. The next is coming into the weatherization program. The state received $190 million to do weatherization on low-income homes. Although this funding goes directly to DHHS, we do partner with them on special projects and special programs. And this is an opportunity, if you work in that area, this is an opportunity for you to get involved and probably be able to assess some of those funds. The next is what Josh had talked about, money that's available that's coming to the state for building out the EV charging network. And I think most of you know, funding was appropriated to the state under the Federal National Electric Vehicle Formula Program. Michigan's share is $110 million that will be distributed to the state over a 5-year period to build out EV charging infrastructure along the state's alternative fuel corridors. MDOT has the lead, and we're working in collaboration with EGLE, MEO, LEO, and the Public Service Commission, and the Office of Future Mobility and Electrification. But the funds are going to be deployed through the Charge Up Michigan program. If not all of them, a significant portion of it will be deployed that way. And the Energy Office is working with MSU, doing modeling. We're working with utilities to come up with a plan. Now, we finished the modeling work. We have an idea of where these charging stations should be located across the state. And now we're having conversations with utilities across the state to try to get a better understanding of, are those sites that we selected for these charging stations, are they adequate? Is there sufficient power in there? to do the build out. And the build out requires at a minimum 150 kilowatt chargers. But there are some areas that we know that could use higher capacity charges in the 300 kilowatt. And those stations are really going to be located in urban areas where there's a high volume of EV traffic or traffic that we believe that will be within the state. And really is the goal is to build this network out by the year 2035. We know that the adoption of EVs throughout Michigan is going to increase exponentially over time. Currently, right now, the rate is about 25. It's close to anywhere between 15 and 25%, but we're looking for a 40% adoption by the year 2035 or at least year 2040. The next series of grants that were coming out, and I think Josh touched on them, and one deals with grid. Is to preventing the outages, enhancing the reliability of the grid. And this is the funding that's available here is under Section 40101D. Under 40101, there is a number of funding opportunities: 401C, 40101(3), and 40107. But in terms of the state and the energy office, our funding is really focused here, preventing the outages, enhancing the reliability, and the total funding over the life of the project is $35 million, but we get an annual 7.5 appropriation every year. And we will be filing that application with the DOE sometime at the middle of November. We are hosting a public hearing on November 8th. If you're interested, let me know. I'll share the information with you. You can be part of it and get an understanding of what that program is all about. But this is an opportunity if you manufacture a product or something grid related, or that could be integrated into the grid. This is what your opportunity is. You can partner with a utility, either an investor-owned utility or muni or co-op. And so to get a better understanding, if you want, you could please join us on the public hearing that we're going to have on the 8th. The next funding source that's available, that's coming through to the Energy Office, is the Energy Auditor Training Grant. This is funding that we will be getting in to train energy assessors that will go out and do assessments. And we will be partnering with DHHS on this. They will have inspectors that could do training for low-income homes or residences that they do work on as part of the weatherization assistance program. The next two may be of interest to you in terms of two areas. One, and personally, if you have a home that you want to get retrofitted, there's a funding for it. Or two, if you have a product or material that could be used or made available for residential energy efficiency, this is that opportunity. There are two grant funds that are coming through. And although there's an asterisk, we pretty much assured that Michigan's appropriation for the home energy performance-based whole home rebate program is $131 million. That money should be coming into the state sometime towards the end of 2023 or at the beginning of the first quarter of 2024. And those fundings will be made available for home retrofits for low-income families. Now, then there's a second part of this, which is a high efficiency electric home rebate program under Section 50122. That's going to be nearly $131 million that's come to the state, and that will be towards low or moderate income households. And so these are the funding that we know that will be available to the state, and know that they will be coming in. And the funding, a lot of this funding that will come in, that will go out in rebates, the rebates will be offered at point of sale. If you are looking to get a rebate, looking to get an appliance or something swapped out within the time period that this program was operating, the rebates will be offered at point of sale by a contractor that comes in that makes that's looking to sell you energy efficient equipment. The next funding that comes through, this is kind of a total in terms of what be available to all. There's $330 million that will be provided out of $1 billion that will be provided for building energy codes. Although the Energy Office doesn't really work in energy codes, the way the legislation was written, that funding does go through the Energy Office, but then we are working with Laura, the buildings, or the building, commercial building and residential building bureau there in partnership, so that it comes in through the Energy Office, but then we will transfer the money directly over to the building codes office to administer. The next pot of money that's coming in, and this money is not formula, but it's more competitive based. That's the $7 billion. I think Josh talked about it for greenhouse gas reduction programs. But we know that there will be a portion that come into the state. It won't be the $7 billion, but by formula, I believe that we have a good estimate that at least over $10 million will come into the state for working on greenhouse reduction programs. Again, this information, because of timing, I'm going through it real quickly. These slides were made available, and you can read them, and you get a better understanding of the nature of these programs. The next one is the Advanced Industrial Facilities Deployment Program. Although there's $5.8 billion that are coming in to do work in this area, the state's program, money's coming directly into the Energy Office, is roughly $12 million. We know that's going to come in over a 12-year period to provide this assistance on clean energy demonstrations. The next, Josh talked about this too, the $250 million is slotted for climate pollution reduction grants. Those grants are going to be used to reduce pollution, P2 and GHG emissions, put together implementation plans provided in section 60114. These funds, again, they are, although competitive in nature, they will come into the Energy Office, and we'll partner with our Air Division as well as the Office of Climate and Energy to put together programs that we can implement to take greater advantage of these funding. And then we have the funding through the reduction, reuse, and recycling program. There's $75 million that's available. We will be partnering with local communities and with others to compete for this funding. Although it's competitive based, we know that a portion of it is going to be directed at states, so we're not too concerned about the state getting a share of it. A portion will come to the state, and it will come through the Energy Office and Sustainability Group to work with third parties on projects. And that's basically it. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then I'm going to turn it over to Nadia. And then if we have time, we'll just have some questions. Nadia?
Yeah, thanks, Robert. Really appreciate you putting that level of detail in. And as Nadia's pulling up her screen, just want to make a couple comments on that. If you heard Robert, in some cases, for some of this funding, you would apply directly to Eagle for grants, for loans, for assistance. And in some cases, he'd mentioned that they're working through another third party, right? That often could be an NGO here in the state that is, helping do assessments for energy efficiency at residential applications, for instance. So if you have any questions afterwards, we can kind of help you understand, how these programs work and what other third parties are involved, that if you're interested in those programs, how to get connected to them, and be positioned. So for example, the reuse, recycling, that some of the grants are available directly through Eagle, but there's also support programs, right? And technical assistance through Next Cycle Michigan, which is a program that's managed by RRS and Centropolis and Michigan Recycling Coalition. So it's not always funding that's available too. It's often assistance, assessments, technical assistance that is made available to the community as well. So last but not least, Nadia Abenusser, who heads up federal opportunities as the director at MEDC. I've been fielding as many questions as I could with direct answers, but again, submit your questions, Q&A. We're probably going to run a little bit beyond the hour, which is fine. This is a recorded program. If anybody needs to drop off, we'll make sure you have access to this within a day or two, so you can, access anything that you missed. There's obviously a lot of interest in this area, so I want to make sure that after Nadia finishes, that we have plenty of time for Q&A. Nadia?
Thanks, Dan. So I'm going to go through my slides pretty quickly. We covered a lot of programs already, but obviously between the infrastructure, CHIPS and Science, and IRA, there are a lot of programs funded at the federal level that will support our existing industries. This is not an exclusive list or inclusive list of everything that we were looking at the MEDC in the state, but semiconductor manufacturing, energy storage, transportation, advanced manufacturing, clean energy, and the support for the high-tech innovation and commercialization ecosystem. Those are all areas that we are very interested in at the MEDC. So Dan, Josh, and Robert went over the IRA and the BIL bills. I want to talk a little bit more about the CHIPS and Science. So we all know, we've all been hearing about the chip shortage, and the MEDC worked closely with our delegation in DC to make sure that the CHIPS Act was finally funded and passed. There's $38 billion in grants and loans for semiconductor fabrication, packaging, R&D facilities. There's an additional $11 billion for R&D, which includes another Manufacturing USA Institute, to add to those that Dan mentioned earlier, Semiconductor Technology Center, Advanced Packaging Program, and others through the Department of Defense, and of course, Workforce and Education. So we worked really hard to make sure that funding was going to be available through this grant, through this program for the mature nodes, which is what the automotive industry is using right now, in which we have a major shortage. And there's a minimum of $2 billion that's going to be going to that. We are still waiting on guidance from the Department of Commerce on how these programs will be run, but companies will be applying for the grants and loans. And there will be some type of matching fund required. While these are going to be large projects, they have made it very, very clear that they want the large manufacturers to be working with the small and medium-sized manufacturers and suppliers in the ecosystem. The goal is to grow the domestic semiconductor supply chain, and the only way to do that is to make sure that you're involving as many manufacturers as possible. So it's important that the small and medium manufacturers understand that they are not being cut out of this because they're targeting large fabs. Commerce is indicating that probably the programs won't be launched until next year, right? February, March, depending on how things go internally. They have launched a dedicated website, chips.gov, where they've released their strategic plan, as well as posted webinars that they've held so far to discuss what it is they're trying to do with this program. And we'll be posting FAQs. So basically, all the information on the CHIPS Act will be at this chips.gov website. And as information comes out, we will work to make sure that we are educating our manufacturers and working with them to see how they can all get a piece of the pie. So the other half of the CHIPS and Science Act, the Science Act, didn't really fund anything. It basically authorized a lot of programs that will support high-tech innovation and commercialization. So there are a lot of programs that were authorized that deal with clean energy innovation, the NSF, and other programs that will innovation hubs, regional innovation hubs. So all of these programs will help promote technology innovation and commercialization. Those programs were not funded under this bill, they were authorized. The only program I'm going to talk about is the NSF Regional Innovation Engines, because NSF figured out how to fund this program, even though it wasn't funded in the CHIPS and Science Act. So what the science part of the act did was establish a new directorate for NSF, the Technology Innovation and Partnerships Directorate, the TIP. NSF has realized that they have been funding a lot of basic science, and they want to work on getting the technologies that they've been funding commercialized and out into the industry, as long as these technologies are something that industry and communities and society needs. So the goal of this new directorate is to support translational research, strengthen U.S. competitiveness, developing key technologies, and expand researcher and student participation in the workforce. The NSF Regional Innovation Engines program was launched earlier this year. Concept papers for the two types were due in the summer. So type 1 is $1 million, type 2 over a couple of years, type 2 is $160 million over 10 years. The goal of this is to catalyze and grow a regional innovation ecosystem, which means we'll be commercializing technologies that industry in the region need. We'll be creating jobs in the region themselves. So working the workforce development and innovation talent, spur regional innovation. And it very important is that it leads to collaboration between industry, academia, government, nonprofits, et cetera. So from Michigan led applications, there were 11 type 1s and 4 type 2s. The type 1s have already submitted their proposals. The type 2s are still working on proposals, though they're due in a couple of months. I know Dan will be sharing these out. You can link, there's a link to the NSF website where you can contact the concept paper submitters and see if there is opportunity for collaboration. One thing I wanted to hit on as far as the IRA bill goes is the majority of the funding in the IRA is through tax credits. You have the base tax credit, and then you have the bonus, which can be 5 times as much as the base. And I wanted to highlight this for any companies that are looking to take advantage of these credits. So basically, they have set it up where if you hit these additional criteria, you can get additional tax credits. Prevailing wage, apprenticeship, domestic content. Domestic content part goes towards building out and securing the domestic supply chain in all of these industries. Apprenticeship and prevailing wage is good jobs, growing the economy. These last 2 don't apply to every one of the IRA bill tax credits, but it's energy communities and low income. Again, going towards the whole environmental justice 40 initiative through the White House and the DOE and all the programs. The goal of a lot of the investments is to help uplift these communities that have been negatively impacted either by mining, oil and gas, or other environmental issues, have high unemployment and low income communities. We are still waiting on final guidance across the board for what these tax credits will be and what the bonus credits will be. The IRS last week did release, I think it was 6 different notices that they are looking on the credits in the IRA bill that they are looking for input and comments on. So I would suggest anybody who wants to comment on any of these, they're requesting comments on the credits for clean vehicles, the energy security credits for manufacturing, these bonus credits, energy generation. So basically a lot of the tax credits that were included in the IRA bill, anybody is welcome to submit comments on how they will be applied. So I think that's something that companies feel free to give advice to the IRS. So quickly, I'm just going to go over MEDC support for companies as they go after these opportunities. Obviously, we want to support our Michigan-based companies, get as much of the federal funding as possible. Siting of new manufacturing facilities, we can help identify sites, especially help try and make sure that you hit the bonus criteria, make sure you take advantage of, you meet the Justice 40 requirements of the various grants. We definitely help support in the formation of the public-private partnerships. We've been part of many applications that required this. The Build Back Better Regional Challenge is one example. The Detroit Regional Partnership was awarded a $52-point-something million grant from the U.S. Department of, U.S. EDA for their Global Epicenter of Mobility proposal. Basically, that is a coalition to help improve and move forward the mobility issues in Southeast Michigan with the transition from ICE to EV. We're working on the NSF engine proposal, people, Department of Energy's hydrogen hubs, et cetera. So we really do work on connecting companies with stakeholders. We have connections to the universities. MEDC works across state government. I'm in meetings with EGLE, OFME, LEO, all the other state agencies. And then we have our traditional incentives that companies who are expanding and growing may be eligible for depending on investment and jobs. One last thing I wanted to cover is I do have a small federal matching program. that will provide some of the match for that's required under some of these federal grants. Because it is a small program, it's only small businesses are eligible, or nonprofit, university, public-private partnership type deals. And it must be in an advanced technology sector, sorry. And I do not cover the full match. I cover a portion. So if the match required is $1 million, you may only get 250,000 from this, as long as funding's available. All of the program guidelines are on our website, and you can reach out to me with questions. And I think that's it. Yeah. And there's my contact info.
Nadia, thanks very much. I appreciate you sharing your insights as well as the program. So that allows for, it's competitive, but allows you to, apply to be able to receive support if you're going after federal funding. And Robert mentioned you're going to have a similar program that helps support, projects you might be doing at the federal level, especially with national labs. So if you need any help with that, reach out to me. We still have about 70 people on the line, and I want to make sure I can field some questions. Before I do, I wanted to make another point on the CHIPS Act. It basically is a comment that I think adheres to all the funding. But, when the federal government put out $50 billion to support semiconductor fabrication, you got to remember that attracts a great deal of industry investment. In fact, they were able to secure $150 billion from private industry, like from Micron and Qualcomm, Global Foundries, to make investments. Remember, a lot of these federal grants and federal programs require cost share, and it's just what industry needs to make those investments. You can also expect with this funding a great deal of resurgence and investment from the venture capital community, angel groups, for startups and early stage tech companies in this area, many of which I know are on the line right now, as well as established firms, right? That might be more of just investment banking and private equity investments that you would be reaching out to expand your operations, to grow your operations in this area. So investors are smart. They see when investment makes sense, especially that the companies they're investing in, the projects they're investing in have leverage and a surety. So yeah, let's try to field a couple questions here. And while we're doing this, I just wanted to throw a broad question across to Nadia, Josh, and Robert. This was a lot to absorb, and by the nature of our jobs, we had to dig in a little bit deeper than most, right? But I guess I just wanted to ask, well, what do you see as being the most surprising thing to you as you reviewed what's available? And maybe we'll start with Nadia.
The most surprising, the amount of funding that they were able to get. I think it's really interesting that they are not looking at just one area. I mean, a lot of times from the feds, we will get a ton of funding for batteries and nothing else. I think what this funding is doing is it's supporting the whole industry from A to Z. So we've got the grids. Everybody's worried about electric vehicles and can the grid take it? Renewables and can the grid take it? So we're looking at everything from the ground up. Well, we're going to modernize the grid. We're going to develop the technologies. We're going to deploy the technologies. So I think it's great that it's a kind of the whole solution as opposed to bits and pieces of the solution.
How about you, Josh?
I guess what pleasantly surprised me was how well thought through every funding stream is to get to what Nadia was saying, how comprehensive it is. So, there are elements in the Inflation Reduction Act that help provide money for folks to upgrade their electric panels in their houses and run new 240 volt circuits like that. That's what we need to be able to get EVs and induction ranges and heat pumps online. So that level of detail that they thought through was impressive. There's also there was a bunch of hidden gems that I found as I went through everything that when you look at the top line funding you don't find, but once you dig in. So for instance, there's funding to create a carbon labeling system for products, the equivalent of miles per gallon. There's a bunch of little stuff like that in there that they're not billions of dollars. They're maybe $1 million, but it's enough money to develop that rating system. So that's just one example. So overall comprehensiveness, it was pretty impressive.
I agree with that, definitely. Is Robert still on the line? He may have had to jump. I think he had to jump. So I think what surprised me is the commitment to domestic manufacturing, as I mentioned, and the really incentives or encouragements to choose domestic content and your projects. And of course, the commitment to, the 48C tax credit manufacturing. But what surprised me is the commitment to disadvantaged communities, low-income housing. I never expected this level of investment and support. And Nadi got into this a little bit too, but even though the attention on communities, not disadvantaged communities, but communities that have had like old coal plants in their towns that are now coming to close, and ensuring that a good portion of the funding to support renewables and a more environmentally sustainable community are made available to those communities. So I was pretty excited to see that. Let's talk about timing. What can you share based on what you've learned, even, offline from this and talking to your representatives at the, federal agencies and others about timing? When do we expect some of this money to start flowing, or at least be made available, or solicitations to come out? Let's start with you, Natalie.
So I think the tax credits have a timeline. Those are well known. And some of them start in a year, some of them start at the beginning of the calendar year. So again, we're waiting on final guidance of what they actually mean. And I think there's movement on the IRS side to do that. The CHIPS Act money, we don't expect to see flowing until early next year. So in 2023 is when those will be. They'll finalize the program guidelines and post those. The infrastructure bill, I think, as they get to them, I mean, they're slowly rolling them out.
Yeah, and I think it's important to highlight that the infrastructure bill came before the Inflation Reduction Act. So we're seeing cadence activity for the Inflation Reduction Act. It's not going to be an all at once activity. There are things in there that got triggered right away. So for instance, the change of the solar renewable tax credit to go from 26% back up to 30%, that's already in effect. At the same time, there's a whole bunch of programs in there where it's basically specified, Secretary of Energy needs to determine specifics by Q4 22 or Q1 23. So there's a lot of that where there's still more information to come, but we at least know from the description what the focus is going to be on and what the dollar amount is. And the devil is in the details, but
yeah,
I think we have some pretty clear line of sight on where, like, how the money is going to get deployed.
Yeah, and I think it's important to mention. I mean, Robert was sitting on a lot of the money that they know is going to designate through state energy offices and environmental groups, and some of that, they'll have access to, and maybe spring of 2023. Sometimes it's going to be longer, and even in that case, some is a formulated investment directly from Department of Energy to the state energy offices. But there's other pools of money and programs that he mentioned that the state energy office has to competitively bid for, along with every other state, right? So it's not guaranteed, it's competitive. And then once they secure money, they may need some time to actually roll out a program very specific to support, their individual states here in Michigan. So some of these things just take time, right? Especially if they're going to be subcontracted to an NGO, like a third party that's going to be managing it. It just takes time. So we may have some better insight to that. So if there's any programs that you're specifically interested in, you can reach out to us. We're glad to share. And remember, not everything is rolling through Michigan Economic Development Corporation or the State Energy Office and Eagle. Some money will be going through like Michigan's Department of Transportation, right? For the transportation investments. MDARD, right? Michigan Department of Agricultural and Rural Development. There's quite a bit of money for rural communities in here, for instance. So let's, we talked a little bit about how the state can kind of position themselves to take advantage of this funding. And now that you're on the front lines of doing that, can you, provide a little more insight of the state's game plan as far as, trying to also help, companies be well positioned for this, as well as communities?
So the part of the funding that the MEDC works with mostly is the funding that goes directly to companies. So what we do is we work with our companies to identify the sites, make the local connections, support them with their applications on the workforce side, the Justice 40 side, see how we can help them meet the criteria and, help them on that side. So working with the power companies, all that kind of stuff. We help companies along those lines. And then if they are eligible for our economic development incentives, we can provide those. And then a lot of times those incentives can be used as matching funds on some of these grants. A lot of the deployment grants through the infrastructure grant or the infrastructure bill are, because they are deployment grants, it's a 1-to-1 match. So companies do have to come up with match. So we help, we provide letters of support, things like that. And then we also work closely with our sister agencies, with Eagle, MDOT, to make sure that we have all the ducks in a row that they need to go after these grants. We've worked with our delegations to advocate for policies that are favorable to Michigan companies as well. Like I said, when the carve out for the mature nodes in the CHIPS Act, we really pushed with that to make sure that we're not just looking at next generation that the autos aren't using yet, but we bring some of that production that we have issues with into the country.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And Nadia, we work, as with a lot of companies that are trying to develop, let's say, a battery recycling or, end of life battery refurbishment, remanufacturing operation. And even in distressed communities, I think, which gives them a great opportunity, right? Whether it be in Flint, Detroit, for instance, 2 of our next cycle teams. And what I've been recommending is make sure you're getting to know everybody that you're working with in that community. The answer isn't always the state, right? You have support at the city level, the county level, maybe foundations that really support that region, right? And see the job opportunities and economic impact that facility could have, and getting as much support as you can, because a lot of these programs, as you mentioned, Nadia, they require cost share, they require commitments they want to see the commitment from the community that you're going to be operating in as much as the state, right?
Also, with the Justice 40 requirements on a lot of these grants, companies are trying to locate in these disadvantaged areas. We make a point of them communicating with the communities, because a lot of these disadvantaged communities have been hit, the environmental justice issues. They've had issues in the past with companies, issues in the past with pollution. So it's really important, and the message we give is it's really important for them to connect with the communities themselves, explain what it is they're doing, get buy-in from the community, make sure that what they are doing will actually be benefiting the community and not contributing to the problem. So that's something that I've had these conversations with companies, like, make sure you're talking to people. Not everybody will understand what a battery recycling facility will be doing and things like that. So I mean, we help make those connections. We help tell the story and go from there.
And Josh, I was hoping you could comment on that a little bit too, because when Josh and I really looked at this, like, wow, this funding is going to require entire, growth in areas that we do not have enough capability in the supply chain. For instance, if we're going to try to, these incentives are for residential homes, right, for decarbonizing and making them more energy efficient. We're going to need to do that for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of homes over the next few years, maybe millions of homes, right? And we just don't even have enough energy efficiency auditors and assessment. And, so Josh, can you talk a little bit about what this creates for business opportunities, right, in the value chain?
Yeah, so some people in the industry they use the analogy of World War II style mobilization in the workforce. And I think we're going to see a total sea change here in the next 10 years. If we want to solve the problem, we're going to have to tackle at that level. So the good part is that this funding is at that level, but we need to meet it with the level of services in the workforce. So yeah, when we think about deploying heat pumps, there's going to be a supply chain issue, but the good news is the Defense Production Act was triggered. How do we train all the HVAC contractors up on why heat pumps make sense, and also let homeowners know? How do we train up commercial building operators on how to electrify their operations, or industrial manufacturing? The solutions are out there; they're on the table right now. So I think, I don't know, for me, Dan, the top line here is that the calculus has changed significantly in the last month, and you and I as homeowners, if we're not putting a heat pump in right now, we're kind of missing out. If you're an industrial facility and you're not thinking about your process heating and how to switch that over to some type of electric heat pump technology, because it's on the market right now, you're missing out. If you're a project developer or new company locating and you're not thinking about how can you positively impact a distressed community, you're quite frankly, you're missing the incentives on the table. So there's like something out there for everyone right now, and the calculus literally has changed. So
And just new business opportunities too. I mean, that's what we help do is start and launch and grow companies. And entrepreneurs that are on the line today, and those that will listen to this recording afterwards, pay attention to what is needed in not only the supply chain, but the value chain, not only to produce, heat pumps and renewable products and batteries, but to install them, to service them, right? To do assessments like I was talking about. There's going to be tremendous growth for companies that kind of see these opportunities and are willing to act on them. So we did have a question from the audience that I was going to address as kind of the last question, and then I'll try to get to following through on some of the other questions that came through the chat function. But they said, and maybe this is a better fit for you, Nadia, said, any sense of where the 20 regional technology hubs that were proposed within the America Competes Act of 2020 might show up?
Yeah, so that was authorized on the science side of the science and chips. It'll be through the EDA. They have the authorization says it's at least 20, does not limit it to 20. It's at least 20. They're going to be spread out per EDA region. There are requirements around what, so in each of the 6 regions, there has to be one that is in a low population state, one that is in a low population rural, one in a rural, and one in an EPSCoR state. So they have actually specified 3 in each EDA region, and then there are 2. I forget the last 2 of the 20 that were specified. It does not say that there can only be 20, but the 20 have rules around them. So basically they were authorized through the EDA. There was no funding attached. There was an authorization of how much can be attached to it. So it's one of those things where we're going to have to wait for them to fund them now.
Thanks, Nadia. And thanks, Josh. We're going to wrap it up now. For those that have questions or questions I didn't get to, feel free to follow up with me directly. We went far beyond our hour webinar. So for those that missed it, we have an opportunity to access this recording, as well as the presentation deck that we provided. We'll be sending that out for everybody that registered and attended. What I will say is the opportunities that we're seeing in this space are unlike anything I ever dreamed of. And we're just grateful to be in a position to help companies and communities take advantage of this to improve their economies, sustainability of their environment. And so Josh, Nadia, and Robert and my team will be available to assist you along the way. So thank you for joining us. All right, take care, Nadia. Thank you.